Time is the fundamental firmament, space is happening on top of it.
Can one escape time?
The way I am made is not different from the way the universe is made.
We don't know what the dark energy is. It's meant to be some sort of cosmological constant, but it makes the universe accelerate.
Generally in science you call it a theory.
Yeah.
I call it my experience. If I give you a simple line, can you build mathematics for it? Kala na janati tava jananam, kala na janati tava samapanam, drushto maya tava mahakaraha yogeshvara Kala Kala Yogeshvara Kala Kala. Namaskaram, namaskaram, sir. Because I said something in a language that you don't understand, I think I should explain a bit.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, I'll make it simple. It's a chant talking about how cycles of time can either crush us or trap us, or if we ride them, it can liberate us. Only one who is risen above the duality of one's existence, only one who is in yoga, which means one who has known the union of one's existence with everything else, only he will rise above the time. And only one who rises above the time has mastery over life.
I think the topic which has been given tonight is the discussion of making space and time for consciousness. And so one of the questions is, how does one escape time? Can one escape time? And you refer to cycles of time, which relates to the question of whether time is linear or time is cyclic, which is a topic of great philosophical interest. And in fact, that is something which I would like to talk to you about. And it's a question which arises both in the context of cosmology, which is my professional discipline. When we look at the universe, it's full of cyclic processes, and even the universe itself could be a cyclic process. Now, at the moment, most cosmologists would say we don't live in a cyclic universe because the universe is accelerating because of what's called the dark energy. We don't know what the dark energy is. It's meant to be some sort of cosmological constant, but it makes the universe accelerate rather than recollapse. So if you ask most cosmologists, they say, well, though the future of the universe is it will expand forever and it will get more and more dispersed, eventually we won't even be able to see the other galaxies. They'll be so far away. But that's interesting because if you read most of the religious texts, especially I think from the Eastern tradition, the Hindu and the Buddhist texts, there the indication is that the universe is going to recollapse and that you will actually have cycles of the universe. And I have to confess, personally, I've always favoured a cyclic universe because everything in the world we know of has cycles. It turns out that the time of the cycle is something like 20 billion years. And that's remarkably close. I mean, if the universe is going to recollapse, it will recollapse on that sort of time scale, probably. And modern cosmologists have only discovered this in the last 50 years using their telescopes. And so it's remarkable that Buddha and maybe other mystics were able to get this information, whatever it was, 500 BC, to many, many years ago. So it's like you have this inner space station. So we're spending, through science, we're spending billions of dollars to get this information, whereas one's getting it from these mystical insights for free. Well, of course.
It's not free.
Oh, not
It's
free.
not free. It costs life. It costs life.
Oh, it's not.
It costs life, it's not free.
I see. Okay, fair enough. Yes, fair enough. Yep.
Dollars come from somewhere else. Life goes waste
Yes.
looking at these things.
But to me, this is an important point about the link between science and spirituality. One thinks of them as being opposed. From my perspective, they're both studying the physical universe, and they can both be applied to study the physical universe from an outer perspective and from the inner perspective. And I think ultimately there is agreement. Well, if it's the same truth, if it's the same universe they're looking at, there has to be agreement. There has to be concordance. And I think that's remarkable. So I know there's been a tradition of inner science in Indian philosophy for many years, thousands of years, but in Western philosophy, the focus is all on outer science. And I think part of this union between science and spirituality will be the realization that inner science and outer science must merge. And of course, my having this conversation with
So you're on the top, sir.
this is, yeah. And by the way, whoever prepared this backcloth, it is beautiful. I mean, I don't know if it was done specially for this conversation, but all these equations, they make me feel at home. Yeah. But the only thing I would like to say is we're talking about the physical universe because I am professionally a cosmologist, so I can talk about cosmology without getting into trouble. And so when we talk about cycles and the time scale of cycles, that's conventional cosmology. And so if there are any physicists in the room, you should be happy about that. However, I know this conversation, I hope this conversation is going to veer into other domains where one is going beyond the physical universe. Because I think one of the lessons one gets from, well, mystical insights is that there are other levels of reality beyond the material. I think I refer to this as the domain of post-materialist science. Originally, Sadhguru was talking about cycles of time, and I'm talking about, so far, cycles of time within the physical cosmology, but there are also cycles of time which go beyond physics, and I know we'll get onto that later. But I should maybe ask you to react to this.
Because today, modern science, the methodology is to come up with a concept, make a theory, build a mathematical backbone, and then look for elements of proof which could confirm those things. I believe that's a methodology. The methodology of mysticism or yogic way of looking at things is to turn inward and look at what we are made of. This is coming from the fundamental, in science you would say an assumption. In my experience I say from the fundamental knowing, the way I am made is not different from the way the universe is made. I am just a tiny bit, but still you can sit here with these little eyes, you can look up and look at a galaxy. This is because this is made the same way and we are able to reflect that. There are some studies, people say that they have looked at the vision and mindscapes of some insects or something, some experiments have been made where they're saying their vision and their thing doesn't go beyond their survival requirements. So this capability we have because we are able to reflect the entire universe within us, if we wish. In fact, everything that we are seeing is only a reflection. Right now, these people seem to be here, but we are only seeing them the way they are reflecting in the firmament of our minds. There is simply no other way to see it. So having said that, the fundamental instruments of perception is just this. How we keep it. Different people can see different things based on how sharp they keep themselves. When I say see, I'm not only talking about visual apparatus, we see through the five senses and more. So, in this context, the way we see this is because your cosmology, inevitably the other day, the boss didn't allow you to speak about time because he said, no, it's time. But you had spoken about space, which I see personally as a consequence of time. Well, let me just articulate in simple words what is the way we see the universe and see how many overlaps are there. And if there are things that don't overlap, we can examine why they don't overlap. It's like this. In the yogic principle, the universe was like this. This is usually represented as an arborist, a snake, a cobra running into each other, mouth and tail included, and a hood rising here. So, this is not the European arborist, I know, they make it a circle, but this is how it was. So we call this Anant, that means it's infinite.
It's
infinite.
infinite, yeah.
Infinite, I'm sorry. We're Indian, you know.
You invented the concept.
No, I want to tell you it's not a concept. This infinite or infinity was like this. The nature of infinity, I don't have to tell you, but for everyone, if you make infinity plus 10, it's still infinity. Infinity minus million, still infinity. So, your mathematics don't work. You do plus, minus, multiply, divide, nothing. So, it was like this. You could do nothing with it. Then it unfolded and became like this. Then we call this shunya.
Oh.
Shunya means emptiness. It became empty. What was infinite became empty. This is very important to understand this. What was that which is infinite? Was it not empty? We could not even call it empty or full at that time because it's infinite. There's no plus minus to it, no multiplication and division to it. So it was this way, it uncoiled itself to become nothing. Nothing means we must put a hyphen between no and thing. It is a no thing, but it has a presence now. This presence, I'm assuming, maybe this presence is what the modern scientists are calling as dark energy or dark force or whatever. But it's very appropriate because we call this shunya or kala. The word kala means empty, the word kala means darkness, the word kala means time, the word kala means space.
Yeah.
All these four things became somewhat manifest because it became a kala. So this is here as emptiness, but we call this infinite space. Must mark my words, it's infinite space, not time, because there is no distinction. It is time which is unfolding to become space. So once it became kala like this, you can see it as emptiness, you can see it as time, you can see it as space, you can see it as the first manifestation of that which doesn't have a form. Anything that doesn't have a form is also called color. So, what was infinite space became zero, now +1 is +1, -1 is -1. Suddenly, there is no physicality yet, but there is a mathematical foundation for its physicality. Now, once it became empty like this, the word shunya is, in terms of written word, for the first time it's seen about 400 BCE. There are documents where clearly the word shunya and the mark of a zero is there. It traveled to Arabia in early, the next part of how we count time today. Because those divisions are not there in our minds, because we have to communicate with the English-speaking world, we have also come that the cutoff date is somewhere 2000 years ago. Otherwise, we don't have those cutoffs in our minds. So I'm just saying, what are you calling it now? AD? It's not AD anymore, what are they calling it? CE. It's called CE now, Common Era or something.
Ah, CE, yes.
Yeah. So, in the Common Era, in the 1st, 2nd century, or maybe by 3rd, 4th century, it traveled to Arabia, because Indian traders were maintaining trade routes from India, right from the bottom of India, that is southernmost parts of India, right up to Damascus, Jerusalem, Aleppo. Even today, Aleppo city is supposed to be 8,500 years old, and that city was built by taxing the Indian traders. So, the live transaction was a daily business, people were traveling quite a lot. So, it traveled to Arabia, where they called it cipher. The word cipher again meant empty. This cipher came to Europe, in Latin they called it Zephyrium. That went to Venice, where it was the hub of many things happening in Europe, and there they called it zero, and the English called it cipher. These days nobody's using that word cipher. When we were growing up, it was common to use the word cipher in English language, but I don't know in…
As a code, as a secret code.
Oh, is it?
Well, the word cipher is to do, in English, is connected with coding, but this is a different context.
Yeah, we used to use the word cipher as a zero. When say, it was used in a derogatory way, oh, he's a cipher, he's nothing kind of thing. So, this aspect, once it became nothingness, but it was a firmament of tremendous existence, but without physical form. Then we go into a more, a dialectical way of expressing this, where we say, we're calling this kala as a being, a large, formless, not large, infinite, formless being. Infinite cannot have a form, of course, so it's a being. And he breathes. He was inhaling is a long process, maybe running into millions or billions of years, there are calculations for that, I'm not the mathematician for that. And when he exhaled, it's not that he has nostrils, he exhales from everywhere. If you did not have actually even our skin is it's not only perspiring, it's also respiring, So we are breathing through our every pore in the skin. Like that, when he breathed, that created a certain amount of energy. That we call as Shakti. Shakti came out of him. When energy came out of him, then this firmament of nothingness, which is a powerful force, it started reverberating initially, then caused ripples, those ripples led to cyclical movements. So with these cyclical movements, the first physical forms came out and it all over burst forth. As these cycles became more and more complicated, from whatever we call as electrons, protons, atoms, planetary systems, universes, all this evolved because of the cyclical movements. Fundamentally, we see physicality as a consequence of cyclical movement. Our very birth is because of the cyclical movements in our mother's bodies, otherwise we wouldn't be born. There is a yogic doomsday, you would like to know, sir? So studying these cycles, feeling these cycles in our own bodies and studying these cycles, things were figured out because we were more interested in how to transform life here and how to make a human being go beyond these cycles. As I said earlier, the cycles of time are such, they can crush you. Why in their childhood they were like this and now they become like this, a lot of people. Time has crushed them. People think it's their experiences of life, this and that. No, that is only an excuse, it's actually time which has crushed them. Or the same time could trap people. They're okay, but they're bored and they don't know what to do with themselves.
Do you mean crush them in the sense that they die?
That will anyway happen, but when they're alive, they feel crushed by time. The cycles of time just crushes them day in and day out.
Yeah.
Many people wish the sun doesn't come up tomorrow morning, but it comes up and they have to go to work. It crushes them. You know, in United States they have thank God it's Friday.
Yes, yes.
It means they don't have to wake up tomorrow morning.
Yes, yes. TGIF we
Yes.
used to, yeah. At Caltech we used to have the TGIF celebration every Friday.
So, we want to break these cycles. So, any cycle naturally has a centripetal force and a centrifugal force. If you get caught up in the centripetal, you get crushed. If you ride the centrifugal, then you're released, a tangent is formed. So, to attain to this tangent is the goal of life in the East. We call this mukti, nirvana, moksha, whatever. Essentially, we want to ride the physical cycles in such a way we are liberated from the physical cycles. How did people see these things? How did people come up with these things? This is always a question. Well, how did the modern scientists see something? Today everybody is talking about Hubble and whatever the other one, John Space?
James Webb Telescope.
James Webb Space, whatever. What are these instruments? These instruments are just extensions of our own senses. Only because we have eyes, only because we have eyes, the telescope means something. Otherwise, what is a telescope for a man who has no eyes? Simply nothing, all right? It's just a pipe. With a few mirrors and maybe lenses or whatever it is, it's just a pipe. It's a metal pipe, we can use it for something, but you can't use it because inside they've blocked it with so many things.
Quite expensive.
Expensive pipe. I agree with that. So I'm saying only because we have eyes, we are making instruments which will extend our eyes.
Indeed.
So, this extension was done in so many different ways. One of the things that we did was that we created energetic forms which would make us look very, very far. Today, unfortunately, it is all being misunderstood and misrepresented, but there were instruments with which we could look very far, we could open windows into the cosmos. These we called as our deities. These are not gods, there is no concept of God in the East.
Are you talking about modern telescopes or ancient
Both.
metaphor?
There were no ancient telescopes.
I meant metaphorical.
Yes, they saw things by creating energetic forms. You have definitely heard of, because he was in your neighborhood, Ramanujam.
Yes, of course, yeah.
So when people asked him, some 3,900 mathematical formulations he came out with, which is still being debated and discussed and people are trying to understand what he wrote. When people asked him, he was dying of tuberculosis. He sat on his deathbed and simply poured out mathematics. When people asked him, how does this come? He said, my Devi, which means my goddess, bleeds mathematics.
Ramanujan was at my college, Trinity.
Yes.
But before my time, so I never met him. And to me, that is a fascinating example of how one can get information about the universe, not just through the intellect, but through inspiration. As you say, he thought he had his
sir,
information.
if I should correct that, sir, I'm sorry, I'm
course,
intervening
yeah.
like this. You never get information through your intellect. You get information through your senses, and there in the intellect you mess it up.
Well,
I mean to say you match it with the old information and try to make sense out of it.
I wouldn't like to admit that we always mess it up, but I think
No,
that,
no, I'm saying we're trying to make sense out of
yeah.
it. But normally what we think is sensible right now is actually blocking us, because what we think is smart, we can't leave.
Yeah.
What we think is stupid, we can leave easily.
So you've made so many interesting points, Sadhguru, that well, I'm not sure I can remember them all, but can I react to some of them?
I will remind you.
Yeah. First of all, I'm glad you mentioned Ramanujan and mathematics, because one of the fascinating things about physics is that ultimately the language of physics is mathematics. You can see a few equations behind. And that is showing that our understanding, because mathematics is a creation of the mind. And there's a curious circularity, because mathematics underlies physics, physics underlies our understanding of the universe produces life and brains, and then the brains produce the minds which produce the mathematics. So you've got this curious cycle, the fact that the universe is comprehensible. I mean, you were sort of decrying, in a certain sense, intellect, but intellect is part of the process involved in mathematics, an incomplete process, but it's because it's just the left-hand side of the brain trying to sort of understand things. And to me, that's always fascinating, why mathematics is actually able to describe the universe. It's a miracle. We talked about miracles quite a lot, but it seems such a miracle that human beings, with their limited brains, are able to understand so much of the universe. I mean, we've only been around, well, 10,000 years or whatever it is, and yet we already claim we can almost understand the universe. Physicists claim they can almost understand the universe completely. Now, I suspect that claim will turn out to be wrong, but at least it is a miracle that we can understand so much. So that's why I sort of reacted to the argument that intellect messes things up. I agree it's often wrong, and in fact I suspect most things turn out to be wrong in the end in physics, but one shouldn't worry too much about what's right and wrong. I think what's interesting is the path. I think most theories of physics end up being wrong, but that doesn't mean it isn't useful, because it's the path which is important rather than the final paradigm, which is always going to change. But I remember there's a statement that mathematics is the language of God. I don't know if this is a statement in the Indian philosophy, but mathematics is the language of God, it is sometimes said. On the other hand, I know that Rumi said that the language of God is silence, and that maybe is more consistent with what you're saying. But so that's the first point I wanted to make, the importance of mathematics, although ultimately it can't reveal everything. I still think it's important, and that's why I loved your reference to Ramanujan, who was a spokesman for mathematics, which came, I think, from his Davis, from his angels, rather than just through his intellect. Now, I love the moment when you took your infinity and it turned into zero. Because, as people will know, I spoke about the cosmic Ouroboros in my talk on Thursday. And I love the cosmic Ouroboros because it encapsulates all the triumph of physics in coming to understand the physical universe. But of course, the most interesting aspect of the Ouroboros is where the head meets the tail. And I said, well, the head corresponds to the universe, and we know how big the universe is, 10 to the 27 centimeters, and the tail corresponds to the Planck scale, 10 to the minus 33 centimeters. Well, those are only the biggest and smallest scales as we understand it. Really, what those scales represent, it's infinity and zero. Okay, the larger scale is infinity and the smaller scale is zero, and of course we reduce them to finite amounts so we can understand them. But to me, the really interesting point about the Ouroboros, the top of the Ouroboros, is that is where infinity meets zero. Now, the symbol of the Ouroboros is like a zero, you remember. But the symbol which Sadhguru used is, of course, the symbol of infinity. And I came across your representation of that on the website somewhere. It's a beautiful image. In fact, I think I even showed it briefly at the beginning of my talk. But I'm not sure if it was intended, but to me, that was a fascinating thought, because it shows that, in some sense, infinity is zero. And that's how the universe began, because from a physicist's point of view, the universe began in a vacuum. We don't know exactly what happened at the beginning of the universe, but in some sense, there was just pure energy. There was no matter, no form, no structure. So it just started out of a vacuum. And the vacuum, I suppose, corresponds to zero. But it also corresponds to infinity. Because from my perspective, at least, at the top of the Ouroboros, that may be the end of physics as we understand it. But actually, from my perspective, that is where mind and spirit come in. And so that from my perspective, if we want to have an extension of physics, it's there at the top of the Ouroboros that we're going to somehow find mind and spirit. And maybe from a cosmological perspective, that is where the universe has come from. Because if you believe that mind in some sense was prior to matter, you must find it there at the top of the Ouroboros, precisely where your zero and your infinity meet. Now, and then you refer to all the different cycles of time. The other thing about the Ouroboros is that there are all those different levels of structure. You remember I talked about them. There's biological time with human beings, there's planetary time, there's stellar time, galactic time. So the physical world is full of all these cycles. And so when the material world was created in the Big Bang, it led through a process of evolution to all these different levels of structure, which had all the different cycles, all the different time scales, which of course range over a huge range. I mean, that cosmic Ouroboros was expressed in terms of space, in terms of time, spaces, the scales of things. It could equally well have been expressed in terms of the time scales of things, because every length scale goes with a time scale. You mentioned space and time are intimately connected. And so you could also put time scales around that diagram. Every level of structure has a time scale associated with it. And so that is a manifestation of the physical world, that there are all these cycles. And we as human beings, of course, we experience a limited range of these cycles. And I was impressed, almost depressed, when you said how it's the cycles which can overwhelm us. The experience of these cycles can be almost depressing, because you feel that it's just in everyday life constantly. I hate shopping, and I find having to go shopping every day, especially when my wife is away, and having to every day shop and then cook every day and then wash every day, it's a bit overwhelming. So I think I understood what you meant by that. And but that's part of it. It is part of cycles.
I must tell you, in yoga, these cycles are referred to as samsara.
Yes, yeah.
But in common society, in the language, the word samsara means family.
Oh, right. Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, right. Well, I can… Actually, I don't have any children, but I can imagine that that's… I can imagine that's samsara, yeah.
Suppose you went to your lab and you found a new universe. It doesn't matter, you still have to come home.
Yes, yes, yeah. And yet, of course, from Buddhism, I understand the concept of samsara and the constant cycle of birth and rebirth and how one needs to escape from that. And so my understanding is that although there are all these cycles in the physical world, that there is an escape from all those cycles, which I understand, although don't experience, is in some sense the aim of, I suppose, of the mystical path, to escape from the cycle. I have to say personally, I've never had I'm not a very spiritually evolved person, and I know I'm not going to become enlightened in this life.
Why do you say that?
Well, because I meet more spiritually evolved people.
You're trying to destroy my work.
No.
Because my work is to make sure that everybody, it doesn't matter who you are, what you are, the possibility is always there. Will you invest in the possibility or not? That's left to individuals. But if you say it's not possible, then you're trying to destroy my work. Don't do that.
Well, if by becoming enlightened I can justify your work, I will strive to become enlightened. Yeah. Yeah.